What's that? Yeah. Excited to do that right here. So pretend you did not know. Yeah, and then it'll be awesome. Thank you. What's that? Hello and welcome. Whoa. I apologize for that. Welcome back from lunch. I hope you had a good break and you got to have some good conversations, perhaps even with people that you didn't know before. So I'm excited to get us started on the afternoon's program, and I love that we left it with the panel that we did because it's really representative of ECA. My name is Colton. I'm the Director of Nuclear Policy for ECA. And what I really loved about that panel was reuse, or the idea of both dealing with legacy waste, but also looking towards the future. And that is something that we at ECA, as communities that are obviously hosting EM sites, national laboratories, federal R&D in the nuclear sphere, we obviously want to see cleanup, but we are also potentially hosts of new nuclear facilities and missions. And we want to look holistically at the fuel cycle and ensure that we're addressing the back end so that we can realize all the myriad benefits of new nuclear development. And one place that we're looking at that is as one of DOE's 12 consent-based siting consortia. We're all in different ways across the country looking to increase community engagement and elicit public feedback on the management of spent nuclear fuel and help with the idea of siting a consolidated federal interim storage facility. In our role as a consortia, we're taking a two-pronged approach. One, meetings, in-person, peer-to-peer exchanges, having people together at the same time in the same place, potential host communities, potential host states, potential host tribes, together with federal partners to create the alignment necessary around a shared vision wherein hosting a mission like a waste mission brings value to each one of those parties. We want to drive towards a scenario where we can move from crossing our fingers and hope that we can find consent to entertaining volunteers who see opportunities for multi-generational economic and environmental health. So under that first prong, we are actually excited that we are currently working to develop a webinar series, that we would be hosting with the Department of Energy's Office of Nuclear Energy and with the IAEA, looking at the lessons learned and how to leverage them from siting efforts for interim storage and disposal facilities, both here and abroad. We're going to publicize our inaugural event as soon as we figure out when we're supposed to have that with all of the different time zones that need to be wrangled. But we will let you know, and we're really excited about it. Our other prong is to create or recreate, given that we've done this a couple of times, momentum through grants to qualifying communities that can demonstrate, meaningful interest in building capacity through targeted education and outreach on nuclear waste storage and disposal issues, or evaluating community interest in hosting or supporting a specific spent nuclear fuel storage or disposal mission using consent-based siting. So we've already awarded 3 grants, and today I am super excited, with Marla here especially, and to announce that ECA today is opening up our second round of community grants. We are anticipating giving out up to 6 grants, originally for $75,000, with an opportunity to get an additional $75,000 for qualifying municipalities. We have a press release. You can go to the ECA webpage to learn more. But we are excited to offer that, and you don't have to be, your community, does not need to be an ECA member to apply for this money. If you have any questions about it, grab one of the ECA staff and we'll be more than happy to share information. The other exciting thing is what I'm standing here right now doing, and that is introducing Marla Morales, the acting director of the new-ish Office of Consent-Based Siting and DOE's Office of Spent Fuel and High-Level Waste Disposition. In her role, Marla is responsible for implementing the federal interim storage for commercial spent nuclear fuel following a consent-based siting process. Formerly, Marla was at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, where she worked on the environmental analyses and documentation for consolidated interim storage facility, fuel fabrication facilities, and independent spent fuel ISFC, I'm sorry, and decommissioning facilities. Marla's also led public engagement, government-to-government engagement, and tribal consultation during those efforts. Prior to joining the NRC, Marla was a lead scientist at the Southwest Research Institute in Texas, where she began her career in nuclear energy industry, working on Yucca Mountain and the site assessment there. Marla is also a licensed geoscientist. So we clearly have someone who has the experience to be our partner in all of this, and we are happy to support your efforts. We hope we are supporting your efforts, and thank you for being here.
I can't really follow that introduction, but I'll try. Well, hello everyone. My name is Marla Morales. I'm the acting director of the Office of Consent-Based Siting, and I'm very excited to be here. And as Kara said, the overall office is the Office of Spent Fuel and High-Level Waste Disposition. That is a very long title, rolls right off the tongue. But let's start with that. So if we're gonna look at what spent nuclear fuel, next slide please. I've got it, ooh, yeah. Which one is it? Technical problems. There we go. If we're going to talk about spent nuclear fuel, let's see what it looks like. Where are we today? So if we're talking about just commercial spent nuclear fuel, this is where it's currently being stored. The US started using nuclear power, commercial nuclear power in 1958. Since 2023, we had about 93 reactors hosted at over 53 sites. Of those, 20 of them are shut down. So think about that. What that means is that 20 locations, DOE has not met its obligation to pick up that fuel. That'll be a recurring theme through this entire presentation. And right now we have about 90,000 metric tons. On the current status, the current rate, once the fleet is complete, we'll be looking at 140,000 metric tons of spent nuclear fuel. Not a small or insignificant number. We have got to start having those conversations about what we do about that. This has been a fantastic conference, and we've had a lot of great conversations about advanced reactors, small modular reactors, microreactors, and all the great stuff at the beginning of the fuel cycle. But the conversation also needs to include, as Kara mentioned, the back end of the fuel cycle. We need to take into account the full story of spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste. So if we're talking about high-level waste, this is working in conjunction with EM and NR. We do actually have high-level wastes stored across the country as well in different locations. Mostly these are DOE facilities. Some of them have come to the end of their story, like for example, West Valley is holding currently about 278 canisters. Plus or minus a couple of years, Savannah River will come to an end in 2038, perhaps. That's a very important date. Keep that in mind, 2038. I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. Overall, we're going to have about 21,000 canisters of high-level waste that need to be dispositioned in some way. And just for context, the Navy also sends its defense waste to Idaho. So that's why that is not currently shown on that. So that's where we're currently at. What got us here? As I mentioned, in 1958, we had commercial spent nuclear fuel, or commercial reactors start. But then if you look at maybe 1982, that's when the implementation of the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, which is when utilities started paying into the Nuclear Waste Policy Fund. Fair enough. In 86, we downgraded from 5 potential geologic repositories to 3. Fast forward a year, that is then downgraded once more to Yucca Mountain, and Yucca Mountain becomes the geologic repository on record for spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste. 1998 is when DOE was supposed to start picking up its spent nuclear fuel. It was supposed to start addressing the issue. Last I checked, it's 2024, and we're currently having this conversation once again. In 2010, Yucca Mountain effectively ceased. All right, so there has been work at Yucca Mountain. Yucca Mountain's a literal mountain. It still exists in the world. But the funding for that has been restricted, and what goes on now is more maintenance than it is actual research in that. So again, today's 2024. Where are we now? In May of 2024, DOE made a very important step, and it recognized there was a mission critical need to develop a federal consolidated interim storage facility. That is what we call CD0, the very first step that says, this is a must, we need to address it. There are a lot of nuances within this program that must be kept in mind. It's easy to put it on a time scale and say A equals B, B equals C. That's not really how it works, but it's at least a place to start the conversation so you understand how we got here and what we're trying to address coming forward and how long it's taken us to get here. Why do we care? We care because of the liabilities. If DOE was supposed to start picking up fuel in 1998, it currently is sued every year for about $800 million, not a small amount of money. If you fast forward that to the end of the current fleet, it is still going to have to pay out an additional a little over $34 billion. That's billion with a B. This is also just, this slide and these liabilities are just for commercial spent fuel, so just from the actual current reactor fleet. In 2014, the utility sued and said they no longer wanted to pay the fee, which is fair enough, because DOE had partial breach of its own contract. So they stopped paying that fee at that point. We're looking to potentially site a consolidated interim storage facility as part of that CD0 process in 2038. That's why that number comes right back up again. In 2038, if we're on the path, we're still looking at $34 billion in liabilities. If you can put that all together, yes, the program for spent nuclear fuel at DOE has always continued to have appropriations. It's that bottom line, if you can see it. And if you see that top line, that's the cumulative liabilities for all of the spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste. The slopes of those two lines, for all the engineers and mathematicians and everyone else in here, they're not the same. They're not the same. That bottom line has a big old M on it, and that top line has a big old B. We are not solving the problem right now. And it is now becoming a point where we need to start having those kinds of conversations. This is where it's come in for Congress. As of January 1st, 2026, Congress is going to require that we start reporting that, what our liabilities are, what money has been spent at DOE to address those liabilities, and how much we have brought down the liabilities by that research. The great news is it finally makes everyone accountable to the work that's being done, to what we need to do going forward, and how we can make progressive steps on that path. It is not necessarily about jumping the needle all the way to the end. It's about making that slow and steady process step by step. And that starts with first recognizing what we're doing and what we're up against. What are we really trying to do? We're trying to take SNF from reactors or shutdown sites. As I mentioned, there are 93, 94 now, and the shutdown sites, and also DOE managed facilities. Whether we're going to transport them by rail, road, or barge, that will depend on where the facility is located and what its needs are. And it will go to an interim storage facility, and then the ultimate disposition would be a repository, a deep geologic repository. We are currently developing a programmatic plan that will come out probably in spring of 2025, and that will be in collaboration with EM and NR. It is not just an NE nuclear energy issue, it is also an EM issue, it is also an NR issue. It is a collaborative effort as we go forward. So that will come out in probably spring of 2025. By 2038, as I mentioned, we're talking about 140,000 tons of spent nuclear fuel. If DOE moves 3 tons every year, it's going to take us 50 years to move that. And then it's going to take us 50 years to move it back. And then it's going to go to a repository. This is not a problem we're solving today, tomorrow, next week. This is the beginning of this journey, of this very long journey. We're talking of hundreds of years. This is an intergenerational problem. And think about what that means. Different generations understand nuclear very differently. And it's fantastic there's such a broad breadth here at this workshop, because older generations might think atomic bomb, Oppenheimer. Younger generations may think carbon neutral. Maybe all of us are somewhere in the middle. Maybe when we see nuclear, we're seeing an engineering problem that we know how to solve, we just got to get public support. Or maybe we see an engineering problem that we don't quite know how to solve, and we're looking to find solutions. We need to bring all those voices together so that we can start addressing these larger problems. And for context, if you wanted to know if I'm talking about a 200-year project going forward, 250 years ago, George Washington was alive. So for context of where we're at and where we're trying to go, it's been a hot minute. So how do we do it? The first thing we're going to have to do is we're setting up a design for a federal consolidated interim storage facility. This is what it would look like as of now. It's going to be about, you'd need about 2 square miles to put this facility in. We've released an RFI for engineering input. This is not a small engineering issue. This is a much bigger build. It will also include an international research facility, and I'll also come back to that in a second. Wherever the fuel ends up, we're going to bring in additional things. In the international research facility would go in the footprint of that 2.5 miles, okay? It is sized currently in this diagram or schematic, it is sized currently for shutdown sites, if we take the shutdown site fuel first. It is scalable, that's the whole point. It can become smaller, it can be larger, but we had to start the conversation somewhere. So let's start with the communities that have fuel on site that never agreed to have fuel indefinitely. Let's start with those communities and start with that conversation. And as I mentioned, we do have an engineering RFI out where engineers can provide input on the design of the Consolidated Interim Storage Facility. In addition to that, DOE is also going to set up I don't know if it's going to be a grant or some sort of prize or some sort of award to universities for university students to come up with ideas for design. I say that because there's a couple things that have to keep in mind. Maybe they will have creative and new designs. However, it has to be a licensable facility. There actually are regulations that dictate what a facility has to look like. So regardless of what comes up, it has to be licensable, right? But maybe this is a way for us to get some of that younger input of the people who will be around 100 years from now. Maybe not 200 years unless life changes in some drastic way, but the generations that will be living with this going forward, let's get their input on what they want to see if it ends up being in their community. To build public confidence, we've also implemented, and it has now come on board with the Atlas Railcar. This past summer, it was actually certified, which is fantastic. It is a purpose-built railcar to move SNF. It can hold up to 480,000 pounds. It's purpose-built. It's also censored. So they don't have to wait till they get to a lay-by or the next stop to understand if something went wrong. They will have real-time data on how that train is moving, how each car is moving relative to itself. Makes it very, very safe. In addition to that, it will also have an escort vehicle. So that, if you're looking at this, that's what that would be moving, the SNF in those canisters. The high burnout fuel cask is actually something that's pretty important right now. So right now at North Anna, there is a cask out there that's heavily instrumented, and it has to move in 2027. In large part, it has to move in 2027 because in 2038, there are a lot of licensing applications that would depend on the data that's going to come out of this. So the plan is to pick up the high burner cask, move it to a DOE site, still to be determined, open it up, take the data, analyze the data. Utilities and whomever is licensing can then use that to feed into the NRC requirements as they go forward. What will also happen is in that transport, it's also an opportunity for us to use the Atlas Railcar to prove the safe transportation. We know it's safe. We recognize this. Probably as people in this room know it better than most, but that doesn't mean the general public knows that. As a consent-based siting person and within my office, the comments we get all the time is, we don't think it's safe. If it derails, it's going to blow up. Also, they think that SNF is liquid. We're having to change the narrative in a lot of different ways. Using the Atlas to move SNF is going to be really important for us. And we'll also have to message that the Navy moves fuel all the time, and no one seems to care about that. Except for the Navy, obviously. Wherever this high burnout class ends up being, whichever location ends up, will also have the very first International Research and Development Center, because for those 10 years, it's going to be opened, tests are going to be run, it's going to be analyzed. I'd have to have a hot cell and all that information. When the Consolidated Interim Storage Facility gets built, that International Research Center will then move to wherever the Consolidated Interim Storage Facility actually is. The next part that we're trying to do in terms of building public trust is the package performance demonstration. So in this case, a transportation cask is safe. We know that. We are not trying to test it to beyond design basis events. That is not what this is. But almost all community outreach entails, is transportation safe? If this rolls off a train car, they're gonna roll it back on. This isn't an East Palestine situation. There's nothing that goes boom on this. But we have to be able to prove that to people. Yes, there are tests that were done before and there's video of that, but it's a bit dated. A lot of the tests, excuse me, definitely didn't say that. A lot of the tests, excuse me, have been model tests. People don't trust model, they wanna see it. They wanna see what it can do. There's currently an RFI out right now for input on what tests should be run. The standard tests would be included, the immersion test, the drop test, the puncture test, the fire test. For example, when the Baltimore tunnel fire happened, they had to remodel whether or not a cask could withstand that kind of heat because it was hotter and longer than it was before, and modeling said it was okay, that yes, it could do. The public doesn't trust that. They didn't get to see that. So this is our opportunity to do that. So there is a QR code on here where you can find more information about the RFI itself, but what we really welcome is any questions. What else should we be considering? If we're gonna drop this thing and drop it on a spike and put it underwater, is there something else that we haven't thought of that we should be considering? If so, please let us know. The geologic repository is probably the next part of that. That's the component of this, where all SNF is supposed to end up. It's happy place at the end of this story. Right now, we're doing generic research on the geologic repository. About $20 to $25 million is spent per year to understand that. Understanding different mediums, understanding what worked best. Yucca Mountain is still the geologic repository on record, but we are obviously looking to go past that. As it said, in 2010, it ceased. It stopped being viable. Fair enough. Then let us know where we can take it. Because the very first question, the very second question after transportation, when we talk to community is, it's called an interim storage facility. Please tell me what interim is. Not exactly the easiest question to answer if we don't have a repository. What are we doing all of that for? Why are we moving a high burnout fuel cast? Yes, it's for industry, but what is it really proving? Why are we doing a package performance test? It's because what we're really trying to do is consent-based process. Too often, not just the US government, but folks in general and industry as well, they make a decision, they announce it, and then they have to defend it. Shockingly, that does not go over well. Shockingly, people actually want to be able to contribute and be part of the conversation. That's what the consent-based process is doing. It's participatory, it's adaptive. So as we get input from communities, we can then adjust our process and figure out that didn't really work, or this is the concern in this particular location, it wasn't the concern over here. We should find out how to answer their questions and how to get their input. And as I mentioned before, there are things that communities will have some but limited input into. Licensing regulations are real. The facility cannot necessarily be reformatted to be a hacienda style with a big hole in the middle. Like, that's not gonna really work. Can't have big open doors. But maybe it can have a visitor center that's outside the perimeter. Maybe it can have things like that where it gives communities who are willing to raise their hand an opportunity to say, if I'm gonna say I want this in my community, please let me say please let me contribute to what it might look like. How are we doing that? So in the Office of Consent-Based Siting, we have 5 staff in my office, 6 if you include me. Last I checked, there's about 370 million people in the United States. It's a big continent. So not shocking, with 5 staff, 6 if you count me, we can't get there. So as Kara mentioned, there was a consortia set up, with 12 groups of people that are now canvassing the United States to help us understand communities, to help us understand, what a community is. Is a community a person, a family, a county commissioner, a mayor, a state, a legislator? Also, what is consent? What do you mean by consent? How do we understand consent? What does a community want to know about? What are they uncertain about? What would they like in return? What were the economic benefits? What questions do they have? Those are very real questions. That's what the consortia is helping us do. So the green dots are the awardees. The blue dots are everyone else they've brought on board, subgrants, partners. And as you can see, we are canvassing a much larger swath of the United States. It's a multiplication factor. There is still a bit in the middle that we could use some help with. So if you have some ideas on how to fill that middle section of the states, more than welcome. We do need some input from those states as well. There are concerns there too. What work are they doing? So this has been updated as of 3 weeks ago. They've had 119 engagements, 119. They've had 12 community awards and 12 grants, those things like seed grants. They've started up 20 information projects, 20 ways to get communities to hear information differently. It is not always effective to give someone a handout. You may or may not read it. I'm sure you have plenty of handouts in your hand right now from all of the people here, right? There's a 50-50 chance you're gonna read that. Maybe it's a webinar. Maybe it's a video. Maybe it's just literally sitting down and having a coffee chat and talking about it. All of those different ways to communicate help us understand what communities need and what communities want. They've had 10 tribal engagements. We have actually recently stood up a tribal initiative. We recognized that that was not sufficient. DOE said, we cannot do this process without taking tribal concerns, tribal perspectives into account. So we've set up an independent tribal initiative in which we will be developing a tribal communication plan and engagement plan for tribes by tribes. It is no longer going to be appropriate for DOE to tell tribes how to communicate. Tribes are going to be part of that process. Tell us how to help communicate with you. Tell us where you want to hear. Tell us where you want us to be. That's what that's doing. And 22 government engagements. Most of those are in the local area, but not all. So getting the word out and getting the support is going to be really important. And that government engagement is vital to being successful. The biggest thing that we're doing is by fall of 2025, so in my mind it seems like a really long time away, and I recognize time doesn't work like that, and it's not. By fall of 2025, we are going to be releasing an expression of interest, which means in fall 2025, communities will have an opportunity to raise their hand. It used to be called a national call for volunteers, and realized that wasn't appropriate nomenclature. We're not asking them to volunteer. We're asking them to come to the table with a neutral stance. Come to the table and say, I want to learn more, I want to be part of this process, or I want to learn if I want to be part of this process, even more importantly. That's that expression of interest. Between now and then, we're going to be releasing the site screening criteria and the process document. The process document will talk about the process of what CBS would look like, the different stages you would move through. There are more than one off-ramps in this process. As I said, this is a multi-year process. You're going to have a number of times where you can say, I was interested, I'd heard what you had to say, thank you for listening, and now I'm no longer interested, I changed my mind. Thank you for participating, thank you for your input. We're going to roll that into our CBS process. Again, it's an adaptive process. Or they can choose to stay and proceed to the next levels. We're also going to release the site screening criteria. The site screening criteria will include the 4 criteria that a community would need to have at a minimum to be successful, or to go through the process at least, to start it. That would be the 2 square miles, not protected land, so it can't be a national park, and to be frowned upon. Coastal barriers, and endangered species. So it can't have an endangered squirrel, and that endangered squirrel only lives on that land. That's not legal, first of all. So those are the 4 criteria. Will the application have additional questions and concerns? Possibly, yes. But that's what you need to meet. That's the bar, the initial bar. And the idea would be to get as many communities interested that could be interested to raise their hand, and then start to dwindle that down as communities express more interest or less interest in the process. And then as part of that, we recognize that there are communities that may not have resources to complete the application. So we will be releasing some equity funding to help communities go through the process of completing the application. After that, they will be, if they choose then to be part of the process going forward, they will have technical assistance funding. They will have access to DOE resources, lab, consortia, by the way, volunteering you, consortias, because the reality is the consortia has done the legwork. They've laid the groundwork for all of those communities that we haven't reached out to yet. They're vital resources to help us understand what's being done. In conclusion, for my boss, Paul Murray, he always says this is a good news story. That's one of his favorite phrases, and I tend to agree. We are making solid, small steps moving forward. It was stagnant for a number of years, but we finally had momentum. The CD0 process that said making a consolidated interim storage facility mission critical, big process. Getting the Atlas rail car certified, so we actually have a way to move SNF, also vital. The Advance Act that I mentioned that made DOE and others and Congress accountable for this is vital. The work the consortium is doing is vital. All of that mean we have momentum. That is our good news story. Our highest risk is really communication. It's communicating to make sure that we all know what we're talking about in terms of what's being expected, what's going forward. Also, how we change the narrative or need to adjust the narrative for our audiences is going to be really important. So communication becomes important. Recognizing that in 10 years, it is not a linear relationship. There is a reason that this momentum is happening, the reason we don't want to slow down. We may stumble, but we don't want to fall. If we fall, and if it stops, it's a sliding schedule. You lose 17 years in schedule. It's not 1 for 1. For every 10 years, you use 17. That becomes another intergenerational problem at that point. So it's much bigger than that. And what do we need to happen right now? I would love more staff. 5, 6 isn't really great. For context, the Office of Consent-Based Siting, which is responsible for finding the site, has 6 staff. The Office of Storage and Transportation, which is responsible for making the site or building the site, has 8 staff. So in the nation right now, we have a staff of 14 that are responsible for finding a site and building a site. We need help. When Akron was up and running, it had a staff of 200. So if I do the math, we're short a few, right? We also need to make changes to the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. That's something that people above me are doing. I'm not going to be part of that conversation, but Paul will. And the reason being that we can actually go through the entire process of developing a engineering plan, getting it licensed, having the community input. What we can't do is break ground. So we can go through the entire process, but we won't be able to break ground. That's where that stop is. So those are just the considerations we have. It is, as I said, it's a nuanced conversation. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of complicating factors. Many of them are not necessarily technical complications. I think we all recognize that we can do this and we can build it safely. We just have to be able to be given the authority to do it and also the support from the communities to do it as well. So I do thank you for your time. If there are any questions.
I was going to actually ask one question.
Oh, go for it.
Nice try, audience. So it's easy, and it actually can even be a bonding event to talk about DOE not moving as quickly as we would like them to be moving. But if we looked at that map, appropriations is not moving either. So what would you suggest, or how can we help highlight that Congress needs to support this program and that it is vitally important, especially at the same time that we're trying to encourage new nuclear development?
So new nuclear tends to get all the press. Let's just be honest about that. Is the new nuclear, it's right in the name. But talk to your congressmen, talk to your legislators, talk to the people that you have influence with. Make sure they're aware of what's going on. Make it a priority in the work that you're doing. All of the work, whether it's engineering, design, safety and security, all of that ties into this. So whatever resources you have available to use, start having those conversations, getting the word out and changing the narrative. Reach out to your congressman though, please.
Okay. Ask question.
Okay, let's see how hot this one is. Okay. Hey, thanks for coming. I'm Dan Leone. I'm the editor of the Exchange Monitor. We're a nuclear industry pub here in town, mostly covering you guys. I was curious, and this is actually a question I stole from the Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board, I want to say a year ago. When the consortia finish their work, and by the way, when will that be? What's their deliverable? Does it go to you? Does something get published? You know, is there like a public out brief at the end of the process? And when is the end of the process?
Okay, so let me answer those questions. So one, the consortium, most of them wrap up in about a year, but they started at different points depending on the contracting mechanism. So it's plus or minus about a year when the 2 years they were given will be up. Recognizing that we're putting on an expression of interest in fall of 2025, we couldn't necessarily say you're going to run your 2-year course because their input wouldn't have been included. So what we revised it to be, again, it's an adaptable process, was at the end of the year, so this December, the consortia and DOE will be putting together a report, a 1-year in review, which we will be taking into account all of the engagements. It'll be more than 119 at that point, all of their lessons learned, their activities, what they've been doing, put in a report that will be released to the public, and taking that and incorporating it where appropriate into the expression of interest. Then we go forward, and they wrap up, let's say, fall of next year, about right, some of them. The next report will be publicly released as well. That will then inform the continuing process of an expression of interest. This isn't a short game. You know, we're talking about years in the future. So if we put it on expression of interest in fall of 2025, the announcement for folks that qualify or folks that want to be part of the process wouldn't come out until this January of 2026. So we've got time to incorporate all of the consortium's work at different stages in the CBS process.
Okay, and I'll sit down after this, but regarding the Federal Consolidated Interim Storage Facility, in the code of DOE project management, how far right now with the NWPA as it is, does DOE plan on taking the design? You know, do you go right up, you plow as close to, I think it's CD3 is breaking ground, right? So you take it right up to that point where you could break ground and then wait as long as necessary until you're able to do it? Just how far do they plan? It's at CD0 now. That's, I think, good, everyone in the room would say. But how far does DOE plan on taking it?
So we have to keep marching to that drum because part of what that does is if we make progress, slow and steady steps going forward, that also puts pressure that hopefully everyone in this room will help put on their congresspeople to make changes. We have to have the conversations about changing the NWPA starting post-haste, starting in the next couple of months. Because we all know government moves, I'm a geologist, government moves at a glacial speed, right? So it's gonna take time to socialize that, it's gonna take time to get people on board. We're not looking to build it until 2038. So there is some time there, but it's gonna take that much time to make those changes. But DOE will march forward through CD0, CD1, and CD2 as if we are going to make that. We have to. We can't afford to lose momentum, because we lose momentum, we also lose, most importantly, public trust. If we stop, public trust is lost, and we cannot get that back.
Thank you so much. Join me in thanking Marla one more time.